It's Saturday in first century Jerusalem. Yesterday, the most tragic event in human history, the murder of the Son of God, took place. And yet today, things continue at the pace that they did the day before he died. The Sabbath schedule is virtually unhindered. People are in town for a few more days for Passover and the subsequent festivals. But if Sunday is any indication, the disciples are radio silent. In fact, on Sunday, we find the disciples. The doors were locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews. When they came to Jerusalem, they thought this was it. Jesus was going to march into the temple. He was going to drive out the leadership. He was going to overthrow the Romans. He was going to establish his throne in Jerusalem. And they, as the disciples, were going to sit with him on 12 thrones. And now, he's dead. And the disciples, instead of ruling and reigning in Jerusalem, are cowering behind locked doors. Can you imagine something you've lived your whole life for, something you've believed in with all your heart, something that you've wanted to see since you were a little child? All of a sudden, you're with him. He's curing the lame. He's raising the dead. He is healing the blind. You're convinced this is it. And then all of a sudden, they kill him. How can this happen? This is impossible. The women, for their part, have spotted the place where he was laying and are gathering the spices. But on Saturday, Luke tells us, the women who had come with him from Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned and prepared spices and ointments. On the Sabbath, they rested according to the commandment. But for the Sanhedrin, there was still work to be done. Matthew tells us, the next day, that is, after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember how that impostor said, while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will rise.' Therefore order the tomb to be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples go and steal him away and tell the people he has risen from the dead. And the last fraud will be worse than the first." The Jewish leaders are worried that the disciples might try to perpetuate the stories that they were spreading prior to Jesus' crucifixion, that they might try to steal the body to make it line up with what he taught about his own resurrection. So the Jewish leaders go to Pilate to ask for Roman soldiers to guard the tomb. Pilate responds, "You have a guard of soldiers. Go make it as secure as you can." So they went and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone and setting a guard. Contrary to common interpretations of this passage, Pilate actually denies their request for Roman soldiers to sit at the tomb, instead telling them to get their own temple precinct guards to go guard the tomb. The reason that this is the most probable interpretation of this passage is because after Jesus rises from the dead on Sunday, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. And when they had assembled with the elders and taken counsel, they gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers and said, "Tell people his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So they took the money and did as they were directed. And this story has been spread among the Jews to this day. For one, the guard reports back to the chief priests once the resurrection takes place. If these are Roman soldiers, not reporting to Pilate and reporting to the chief priests instead is highly unlikely, if not impossible. For two, it's very unlikely that the chief priest or the council of the Sanhedrin is going to be able to provide any form of protection for a Roman soldier who fell asleep on the job. He was sure to be executed. But regardless, the Sanhedrin have sealed the tomb, they've placed a guard in front, and they're convinced nothing can get into that tomb. Or out. Well, tomorrow is Easter Sunday. I'm going to be preaching and finishing this story from John 20 at Emmanuel, Tuscaloosa. I would encourage you, if you don't have a church home, find one close to where you live and watch the live stream under this COVID-19 pandemic in social isolation. Most churches aren't meeting. So find a church that you can participate in and watch. If you live in or near the Tuscaloosa area and you don't have a church home, I would encourage you to join us on our live stream. You can go to emmanueltuscaloosa.org and click Watch Online. You can also go to our YouTube channel, subscribe to it. There we'll have the live stream produced as well. So if you don't have a church home, please feel free to join us. And if you live in the Tuscaloosa area, especially, feel free to join us. If you don't live in our area, find a church close to where you live that's going to preach the gospel every single day. That's going to talk about the resurrection every single Sunday. There's lots of good churches out there, and I would encourage you to find one. I hope you enjoyed these videos as much as I did producing them. I enjoyed just telling the story again. It brought back to mind lots of things that I hadn't thought about before. So I hope it has for you as well. Until next time.